Since the release of Clash Royale in 2016, we have seen plenty of changes. Some cards being extremely weak at launch to the point where they're unplayable, and others having such extremely broken stats that you'd be considered a fool not to put them in your battle deck. In today's video, we're going to be covering all of the cards that would either be gathering dust or terrorizing the arena. And in classic ARCTO fashion, we'll do this starting in 2016, making our way all the way through each update every year until we reach today. At the end of each year, we'll highlight 8 cards that stand out as the most broken. Then by the end of the video, we'll narrow it down to the absolute strongest cards of all time. Which ones will reign supreme? Let's find out. Let's start off in January with the beefy units, the tanks. But before we do, I want to talk about something that will make a lot of sense for this ranking. You see, before the update of May 3rd, 2016, commons and rares had a lower max level than epics and legendaries. This automatically puts commons and rares at a pretty obvious, huge disadvantage. Anyway, let's get back to the tanks. How effective would our damage sponges be without any changes made to them? I'd like to start off with the Golem. The Golem was ridiculously underpowered. So underpowered that I barely have to explain why it would be useless. It had 43% less health and damage, and this didn't just apply to the Golem either. The Golemites were treated the exact same, also having 43% less damage and HP. So the Golem really served the same role as the Giant, having only a tiny bit more HP while costing an outrageous 8 Elixir. Before I dive more into details, I want to quickly share something pretty exciting. A little game I've been addicted to for the past couple of weeks now, Arcane Rush. It's a free-to-play game where you collect and upgrade over 100 unique cards from 8 different races, each with their own mechanics. My favorite has gotta be the Orcs. Their multi-strike lets them attack twice, and Rage keeps them alive when attacking. It's insanely fun to strategize with them. You can support the channel by downloading it through my sponsored link in the description down below, or, scan this nifty QR code. You build your team by using coins to buy and upgrade units each turn in the shop, creating powerful combos to dominate your enemies. And if you're a TCG fan, you'll love how smooth and clean this game feels. Each race is incredibly unique. Dwarves get bruised to power up their units, dragons can devour allies for extra space, and pirates, the newest addition, plunder treasures for insane rewards. There is so much variety to explore. One unique mechanic that really sets Arcane Rush apart are relics. They give you powerful effects as you level up, like my favorite tier 3 that gives you bruise every time you sell a unit, making dwarves absolutely broken. And there's even more. 70 new cards, daily quests, and a battle pass to help you upgrade faster. Seriously, this game has like everything if you love strategy games. Arcane Rush is free to play, and by downloading it through my sponsored link or scanning the QR code, you'll be supporting the channel while jumping into the action. Try it out and let me know what combos you come up with. I'll see you in the arena. The next purple-eyed troop that wouldn't be nearly as strong would be the Mommy PEKKA. Same as the Golem, it would have an 8 Elixir cost instead of the current 7, while only having 13% more hit points, and that made it an even bigger commitment. It wouldn't be completely useless, but it would be nowhere near as versatile as it is today. The Giant Skeleton, however, would be pretty interesting. It's hard to say how strong it would be, but the Giant Skeleton's death damage was 54% stronger compared to today. The bomb would also detonate within a second, which is 2 seconds faster than today. The thing that would make the Giant Skeleton so strong would be the fact that you could have him soak up incoming damage while dealing damage to enemy troops with his melee attack. Once the enemy takes out your Giant Skeleton, wait 1 second and poof. The enemy attack has been decimated. Remove the skeleton from the giant and we just have the regular giant. Well, kinda. The regular giant would make for a decent tank early on in the game, but with more cards being added in the future, he'll most likely be overshadowed. And that was it for tanks in January. Now, let's talk about buildings in Clash Royale. Buildings underwent some pretty massive changes over the years. Take the cannon, for example. Imagine it costing 6 Elixir. Pretty insane, right? So it's hard to say whether they would be really good or really bad in a world untouched by balance changes, but I've done my best to come to a decent conclusion. You see, Clash Royale promotes offensive gameplay, which keeps the game interactive and prevents it from getting boring, with both players just, defending. However, buildings are generally there to defend, and when they were first released, they were a bit too overwhelming. Let me tell you why. The cannon used to cost 6 Elixir, which is absolutely crazy when you compare it to its current 3 Elixir cost. That hefty price tag made the cannon a complete monster on defense. First off, it had an incredible 7-tile range, while now it only has 5.5 tiles. For context, a 7-tile range means the cannon could outrange units like the Musketeer, Wizards, and even the Dart Goblin. This longer range made defending a lot easier, as you didn't have to time your placement as much. Something that also made defending a lot easier is that instead of the current 30-second lifetime, the cannon used to last an insane 1 minute. To make things even worse, the cannon had a 63.81%, that's a really precise number, more health than it does today. And the reason this number is so specific is because its hit points have been nerfed multiple times, and it's quite a bit faster, firing a cannonball every 0.8 seconds instead of the current 0.9. Now, to be fair, the cannon does deal 38.6% more damage per shot now, but with all the other advantages it had back then, the cannon was undeniably a total beast on defense. The mortar tells a similar story. Originally, it also cost 6 Elixir, dealt nearly 50% more damage, had a 13-tile range, and lasted a full minute on the battlefield. We can assume that all spawners would be pretty close to useless in this scenario, as defensive buildings would remain on the map for a full minute, preventing barbarians, spear goblins, or anything from dealing any chip damage. However, the tombstone might still have some use, as the early tombstone would spawn more skeletons upon destruction. That brings us to the first rendition of the Elixir Collector, and it was way too strong. For only 5 Elixir, you could just make profit in Elixir nearly every time. The Elixir Collector had way more hit points before any balance changes, and thus spells were way less capable of taking out the Elixir Collector. Not even a rocket or lightning spell dealt enough damage to take it out, and more Elixir generation means you're able to play overpowered cards even more often. Speaking of overpowered cards, let's talk about the spells that were available in January of 2016. I believe we're all familiar with the concept of Crown Tower damage. Currently, spells only deal 30% of their full damage to Crown Towers, but for this video, we can crank that number right up to 50%. But I'd like to start off the spell section with a card that could very well make it all the way through to the end of this video. The freeze spell. While it didn't deal damage on release, there are 3 main factors that made the freeze spell incredibly overpowered. The first is its duration. The freeze spell used to last 5 seconds, compared to just 4 of today. The second is its radius. Instead of the current 3-tile radius, it had a 4-tile radius. For reference, Poison Spell sits at a 3.5-tile radius, making Freeze's radius quite a bit bigger. Sure, a bigger radius is nice, but that alone doesn't make it that strong, right? Well, you're partially right. While these 2 factors were definitely nice, they didn't make the freeze spell completely broken. What really made it overpowered was its upgrade system back in January of 2016. Each level added an extra 0.4 seconds to the freeze duration. Starting with a 5-second freeze at level 1 and upgrading it 7 more times, you would end up with a staggering 7.8 seconds of freeze duration at max level. Freezing any troop or building for that long? That's just insane. It can completely disable any overpowered enemy troops charging your way, and it can easily assist the overpoweredness of your troops while attacking. Left untouched by the Balance Hammer, Freeze Spell would definitely be a top contender for one of the most broken cards by the end of this video. Okay, calm down. The lightning spell, on the other hand, is most likely not going to make it very far in this video. The biggest reason it's even considered viable is its ability to stun and reset key units like Inferno Towers, Inferno Dragons, Sparky, and maybe even a Prince. But here's the twist. This wasn't always part of the lightning spell. Back in January of 2016, it simply dealt damage to 3 single targets. Nothing more. And here's another surprise. Zap suffers the same issue in this conceptual video. The whole reset Zap mechanic didn't exist until late February. Now, one thing that Zap was good at was one-shotting goblins, thanks to its higher damage output. But that's not all that great, because moving on to the next spell, the Goblin Barrel, you'll quickly see why that doesn't matter. Back in the day, the Goblin Barrel cost 4 Elixir, which made it Well, basically useless. As a result, Zap wasn't critical because most players wouldn't even bother using the Goblin Barrel in the first place. Arrows, Fireball, Rocket, and Rage didn't really offer anything too special, but they might still be useful as players always need some form of spell in their deck. The 2016 Rage might seem useless, but in a meta with no balance changes, boosting the movement and attack speed of overpowered cards could definitely make it something worth considering. A massive trend we see whenever a card becomes overpowered is the resurgence of the mirror. Phoenix is way too strong? Hey, let's mirror it. Goblin Machine is trampling the arena? Mirror it. And in a video all about overpowered cards with no nerfs, the mirror will 100% make for an even more ridiculous meta. However, the mirror wasn't released without flaws. Before level scaling was introduced in Clash Royale, all card rarities started at level 1, but that didn't make them equally strong. For example, a level 4 epic would be the equivalent of a level 7 rare and a level 9 common. In January of 2016, the way the mirror worked was that it would play the card you just used at the same level as your mirror, meaning that a level 4 mirror would spawn a level 4 rare and a level 4 common, even though a level 4 epic was the equivalent of a level 7 rare and a level 9 common. So mirroring a common or rare wouldn't be ideal, but for an epic, it would be fine. However, taking a look at the February 2016 patch notes, we can see that there was a bug. When a player used the mirror, they actually received the extra elixir they had just spent. This made the mirror unbelievably strong. As long as you were mirroring epics and legendaries, which we'll get to in a moment, you could play an overpowered card again with no drawback. Imagine mirroring a freeze. For only 8 elixir, you could freeze anything for a staggering 15.6 seconds. I am so happy that Freeze got nerfed. Now, before we move to the March update, let's quickly categorize the other cards worth mentioning from January. The Hog Rider would likely have been a solid choice in 2016, especially when paired with Freeze. However, with the eventual introduction of other cards fulfilling similar roles, its effectiveness would gradually diminish. The Mini PEKKA would serve as a decent counter to the Hog Rider, but it's probable that it too would be overshadowed by future epic or legendary cards, offering more versatility in the same role. As we discussed earlier in the video, commons and rares face a significant disadvantage due to their lower max levels. Despite this, the balloon might still shine, thanks to its status as an epic card and its strong synergy with Freeze. Meanwhile, the baby dragon could see some use early on, but it would most likely be phased out over time, replaced by newer cards boasting overpowered stats and abilities. A couple come to mind. Whew. Okay, so that was January. Now let's move on to March, which won't be that bad since we only got 6 new cards. But before we get carried away, 2 of these will actually be quite interesting: the Princess and the Ice Wizard. But before we get to those 2, let's address the other 4 cards that came out with this March update. First off, we have the Royal Giant, which already suffers quite a bit as it's a common card. With very little damage and health for 6 elixir, the Royal Giant is a card that won't be mentioned for the rest of the video. Sorry, big guy. Next up, we have the 3 Musketeers. On release, they cost a whopping 10 elixir, making them an enormous commitment and far too risky to use. Then there's the Dark Prince, who was incredibly weak at launch. He even took knockback from Fireball. So far, we haven't seen any cards that could really be considered, viable in this theoretical meta. Now let's talk about Poison. As an epic card, it might have seen some play before being overshadowed by future spells. But here's the interesting part. Poison once had a slow effect, and no, I'm not talking about a movement speed slow like we know today. Back in 2016, Poison also slowed attack speed, making it much more impactful. On top of that, its duration used to last 10 seconds compared to the 8 seconds we have now. A powerful card for sure, but not the game changer we're looking for. Speaking of game changers, let's dive into something that really shifts the balance for this video: legendary rarity. You know how epic cards can be upgraded 1 level higher than commons and rares? Well, legendaries blew that out of the water. So a legendary at level 4 was the same as a common at level 12 or a rare at level 10. This is where commons and rares max out. Now, a legendary at level 5 would be similar to an epic at level 8, but here's the kicker. There was a brief window when legendaries could be upgraded to level 6, surpassing commons, rares by 2 levels, and even epics by an entire level. This automatically gives cards like Princess and Ice Wizard a massive advantage, as they can simply be upgraded way higher. The Princess only ever got nerfed after her release. She used to have 10% more hit points, a larger area radius, and even had a range bug that increased her range from 9 to 9.5 tiles. As we've established earlier in this video, certain buildings like Cannon would be incredibly strong due to their ability to stay on the map for so long. The Princess, with her ability to snipe these buildings from a distance, would definitely be a huge asset in making connections to the tower. The Ice Wizard will clearly benefit from simply being a legendary, as he'll have a higher max level, but he wasn't as strong as the Princess. Though being able to slow down any enemy push while dealing a bit of damage will make him a solid choice. Now that we've established how legendaries would completely shatter the balance of the game, let's move on to the next 3 introduced in May. First up, the Lava Hound. This card would be an exceptional tank, especially since no one would be running Tesla. Partly because it's a common card and partly because it's quite underwhelming. The only reliable counter to the Lava Hound would be the Inferno Tower, which, to its credit, would not be reset by Zap or Lightning in this meta. If the Lava Hound became popular, the Inferno Tower would almost certainly rise in usage as well. To deal with the Inferno Tower, Lava Hound players would likely include Freeze in their decks, but let's be real. Everybody would be running Freeze in this meta. At least Lightning and Zap would not be able to reset the Inferno Tower, and that would offer a little bit of relief. Speaking of things that can't be reset, Sparky. Sparky's biggest weakness has always been her vulnerability to being reset after charging, leaving her exposed for a full 5 seconds. But here's the twist. In this meta, the only stun available is Freeze. That absence of stuns would make Sparky a lot more viable. If a card like Hog Rider became meta, as we speculated earlier, Sparky could simply one-shot it. While Sparky might not be game-breaking, being a legendary certainly gives her some advantages. Finally, we have the Miner. And this card would be incredibly strong, especially since it originally dealt 40% Crown Tower damage compared to the current 25%. Its ability to reliably chip away at towers would make it a top-tier card. Plus, Miner could effectively counter Princess, another popular legendary card. If Miner became a staple, we might see more Skeleton Army in play, which could give Zap a purpose in some decks. However, Poison would likely outshine Zap. It's an epic card, lasts for 10 seconds, and can damage and slow enemy troops while covering the Miner's area. An honorable mention that came with this May update would be the guards. If Sparky does become meta and you don't have Freeze in hand, the guards with their shield will make for a perfect counter. And even if the Sparky isn't meta, they might see some play defending the Miner or other cards. Man, almost 20 minutes into the video and we're still in 2016. On to July, where we see the appearance of the Ice Spirit, the Bowler, the Log, and the Lumberjack. The Ice Spirit seems interesting, as besides the freeze spell, it'll be the only card able to reset cards for now. Even though it's a common card, its freeze duration is the same no matter what level. It even dealt 10% more damage, and the most interesting part is that instead of freezing for what is now 1.2 seconds, it would freeze for a full 2 seconds. The Ice Spirit might be one of the rare common cards, along with the Cannon, that could hold its own in a meta like this. Meanwhile, the Bowler would likely see little to no play. Released with a 6 Elixir cost, it was simply too expensive and couldn't even target air units, making it a poor investment in most scenarios. As for the Log, it might be the only legendary card to remain largely overlooked. On release, it was laughably weak. Its rolling speed was painfully slow, making it hard to react to freshly deployed troops. Additionally, it lacked the ability to knock back all ground units, didn't roll as far, and dealt far less damage than it does now. We've already discussed how the Goblin Barrel wouldn't see much play, meaning the Log wouldn't be essential for countering it either. However, there's one specific use case where the Log could shine: taking out the Princess for a positive Elixir trade. Since the Princess would likely be nearly in every deck, the Log might find some relevance as a reliable counter. That said, the Miner could also take out the Princess just as effectively, and beyond dealing with her, the Log wouldn't serve much of a purpose. As a result, while it wouldn't be entirely useless, its role would remain very limited in a meta like this. Now let's shift to the Log's sworn enemy, the Lumberjack. As a legendary card, the Lumberjack would likely replace mini tanks like the Knight and mini PEKKA. That is, if those two were even viable in this meta to begin with. With his moderate health and high damage output, the Lumberjack would be a fantastic defensive tool, seamlessly transitioning into a powerful counterpush. However, what truly sets him apart is his unique ability. Upon being defeated, the Lumberjack drops a rage spell onto the arena, supercharging your already broken cards to deal even more damage. This combination of versatility and synergy with some overpowered cards ensures that the Lumberjack would be a formidable asset in a meta with no balance changes. Next up, in September of 2016, we see the arrival of 4 new cards: the Ice Golem, Mega Minion, Inferno Dragon, and Graveyard. The Graveyard could likely find a place in some decks, especially when paired with Freeze. However, considering that Poison will probably dominate as one of the most popular spells alongside Freeze, Graveyard may struggle in certain matchups. The Ice Golem, on the other hand, might fit into decks as a low-cost distraction. Its primary role would be absorbing damage while cycling back to stronger, overpowered cards, a simple yet effective utility. Now let's talk about the Mega Minion. If you were around during its release, you'll remember just how oppressive it was. But with the rules of this video, it may not be quite as dominant as you'd expect. Sure, it delivers quick, solid damage for 3 Elixir, but being a rare card limits its potential in this meta. Don't get me wrong, it'll definitely be on the stronger side, but nowhere near the meta-shaping powerhouse it was in reality. That said, this next flying unit is a totally different story. The Inferno Dragon is poised to be a top-tier pick. Its ability to melt through tanks like the Lava Hound or Giant Skeleton makes it a natural fit in most decks, especially if those tanks gain popularity. Similar to Sparky, the Inferno Dragon's main weakness is having its beam reset, but as we've already established, the lack of widespread reset mechanics in this meta drastically reduces this vulnerability. Now you might be thinking, what if I use the Fireball to knock it back and reset the Inferno Beam? Well, that would be a smart move, except the Inferno Dragon didn't take knockback upon release, and as a result, its only real counters are the Ice Spirit or Freeze Spell. Though let's be honest, every card would be vulnerable to freeze. As long as the Inferno Dragon has a tank in front of it to soak up damage, it can dismantle virtually any tank unit and even shred crown towers with ease. The Inferno Dragon would undoubtedly be a force to be reckoned with. At least that would be until November, when the Electro Wizard entered the arena, alongside the Tornado, Clone Spell, and Elite Barbarians. The Electro Wizard truly shocked the game, pun intended, with its unique ability to reset cards upon spawning, thanks to its zap-like entry effect. Beyond its spawn ability, every attack could reset up to 2 enemy troops or buildings at once, adding immense value in battles. On release, the Electro Wizard dealt significantly more damage compared to its current state, and could even permanently stun certain troops, preventing them from landing a single attack. If Sparky and Inferno Dragon end up as dominant as we might have imagined, the Electro Wizard would undoubtedly be a balancing force to tone them down. Now moving on to the Elite Barbarians, or as we should call them at this point, the not-so-elite Barbarians. Yeah, I really couldn't come up with anything better. On release, they were widely considered one of the worst cards in Clash Royale history. Unfortunately for this scenario, they would stay that way. We don't need to waste any more time worrying about them. The Clone Spell, well, it's likely to remain a niche pick, useful only in very specific scenarios, perhaps in decks featuring the Lava Hound or Giant Skeleton, where doubling down can create chaos. The real game changer from this batch, however, is the Tornado Spell. Its ability to clump troops together allows splash units like the Princess, Sparky, and Ice Wizard to gain incredible value by hitting multiple troops simultaneously. And trust me, this utility would only grow more important in the coming months. The Tornado's initial version, though, was a far cry from what we know today. While its current duration is just over 1 second, the original Tornado lasted a staggering 3.05 seconds, holding troops in place 3 times as long as it does now. This extended duration made it an incredibly oppressive tool for disrupting pushes and dictating the battlefield. But the Tornado's true impact lies in something revolutionary: activating the King Tower. By pulling miners or other units into the King Tower, players could gain a permanent defensive advantage. And with the Freeze Spell running rampant in this hypothetical meta, having an activated King Tower would force opponents to think twice about their freeze placements. The Tornado, as mentioned earlier, was a game-changing card, but its synergy with another card, the Executioner, created one of the most infamous combos in Clash Royale history, the dreaded X-NATO. Before diving into their synergy, let's explore why the Executioner alone was an absolute menace on release. First off, the Executioner boasted a 5-tile range, with his axe reaching an impressive 7 tiles. However, it wasn't just his range that made him overpowered. A series of bugs added even more chaos to the battlefield. When throwing his axe, the Executioner could hit enemies behind him as the axe returned. It also dealt damage to enemies directly in front of him, even when the axe was several tiles away. If that wasn't enough, the Executioner's axe would reset enemy attack animations back to 0, much like how the Electro Wizard stuns troops. To top it off, his axe could clump smaller units like lava pups together, making it easier to deal splash damage across multiple targets. On its own, the Executioner's broken mechanics already made it a nightmare for opponents, but when paired with the Tornado, the synergy was just devastating. The Tornado's ability to group troops together allowed the Executioner to hit them all at once with his sweeping axe throws, turning almost any push into shreds. Together, these two cards became a combination that terrorized the arena. As for the other cards introduced alongside the Executioner, that being the Goblin Gang, Dark Goblin, and Battle Ram, they didn't pack nearly as much impact. The Goblin Gang, while decent, suffered from being a common card, which severely limited its presence in the meta. Meanwhile, the Dark Goblin struggled to find a place due to its inherent weakness on release and the overwhelming dominance of the Princess at her peak. Similarly, the Battle Ram lacked strength at launch, ensuring it stayed on the sidelines of competitive play. Okay, 26 minutes in, and that finally wraps up 2016. Now it's time to decide which 8 cards truly stand out as the most broken from the game's release year. I think it's safe to assume that the freeze spell will have the most play, as it can easily disable any troops that were too strong and can help your own push take down everything with little to no issue. The mirror will 100% make this a terrible meta, as freeze can go from a 7.8 second to a stupid 15.6 second freeze. As long as you use the mirror with epics and legendaries, it will be beyond broken. The Electro Wizard will make for a great support and defense, being one of the 3 cards able to reset together with Freeze and Ice Spirit. The reset together with his decent damage output and survivability makes him our 3rd broken card for this year. Next up, let's do a bit of a 2-for-1 special, the Executioner and Tornado. The Executioner being the perfect answer to any swarm or air card makes it a perfect choice for nearly any threat. Add Tornado into the mix and you got yourself one of the best card combos in Clash Royale history. Tornado, allowing players to activate their King Tower, is crucial for trying to defend against any push. Princess, with her absurd range and splash, will simply be too obnoxious for anybody to deal with. Poison will most likely be the safest option, as it can defend against Graveyard and deal good damage to the Princess Towers while slowing down enemy troops. Remember, we're still working with that 50% original spell damage to towers as opposed to the 30% that we have today. And that Poison spell will most likely be paired with the Miner. The Miner has good Crown Tower damage and almost guarantees damage. It can also be used to take out the Princess. Those are my picks, but let me know what your top 8 most broken cards would be and why. I love reading what you guys have to say, so please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. I love talking about that stuff. That's like why I made this channel, so please post your ideas. I love reading them. Jumping ahead to May of 2017, we've got our first batch of new cards for the year, and this set did not disappoint. In May, Clash Royale introduced the Heal Spell, Bandit Bats, and the infamous Night Witch. Let's start with the weaker entries. The Bats, a common card, initially appeared in groups of 4 instead of the 5 we see today. This reduction in unit count significantly impacted their value, leaving them far less effective. Similarly, the Heal Spell never found a solid place in the meta. Even under the rules of this video, it wouldn't have a spot. It simply didn't do enough to justify its inclusion. Its limited viability was primarily tied to 3 Musketeer decks, but with the 3M stuck at 10 Elixir and constrained by its rare rarity, it's safe to say that both the Heal Spell and 3M would fall flat in this meta. Now let's move on to the heavy hitters, the Bandit and the Night Witch. The Bandit wasn't game-breaking on release, but being a legendary card gave her a natural edge. Additionally, a bug allowed her to dash from shorter distances, meaning she could deliver more frequent and devastating damage. While she wouldn't be completely dominant, she would definitely carve out a spot in some decks. But then there's the Night Witch, easily one of the most broken cards in Clash Royale history. Would she maintain her status in the meta? Well, let's break that down. The Night Witch on release was a force of nature. She dealt significantly more damage than her current version and had a longer melee range. Yes, even melee troops have a range. She spawned 2 bats every 5 seconds, immediately summoned 2 bats upon deployment, and spawned an additional 4 bats upon death. To make matters worse for her opponents, bats back then had faster attack speeds, amplifying their threat. With these stats, Night Witch would easily fit into any deck. Even in this chaotic meta, she'd likely replace cards like the Lumberjack as a mini-tank, offering both utility and raw power. However, she wouldn't be invincible. The Executioner Tornado combo and Poison would still present significant challenges for her. That said, while she might not be as overwhelmingly dominant as she was in her original meta, she'd remain a terrifying presence, just another piece in the arsenal of broken cards. Less than a month later, we witnessed the release of 4 new cards: the Skeleton Barrel, Flying Machine, Cannon Cart, and the Mega Knight. While the first 3 aren't all that groundbreaking, one card immediately stood out: the Mega Knight. On release, the Mega Knight was a powerhouse. He dealt nearly 50% more damage both with his spawn and jump attacks compared to his current stats. His regular attack also packed a heavier punch, coupled with an increased splash radius. To add to his dominance, Mega Knight had a larger minimum jump range, allowing him to leap onto targets from further distances. What truly makes the Mega Knight an unstoppable force in this hypothetical meta is the lack of viable counters. A max level mini PEKKA would always be 2 levels lower than a max level Mega Knight, making it significantly weaker. Meanwhile, the PEKKA at 8 Elixir wouldn't see play due to its inefficiency, something we discussed earlier in this video. With the best stats he's ever had and very few cards able to stand against him, the Mega Knight undoubtedly cements himself as a top contender for one of the most broken cards by the end of this video. In December of this year, we have 2 new cards that joined the arena: the Zappies and the Hunter. Let's start with Zappies. Unfortunately, they won't make much of an impact in this conversation. On release, they were underwhelming and even lacked the ability to target air troops. This major limitation, combined with their weak stats, leaves them entirely out of the discussion in this meta. The Hunter, however, is a different story. On release, he was a solid card with a longer range than he has today, and a wider bullet spread, making him quite effective at close-range combat. Despite these strengths, the Hunter would struggle to compete with the Night Witch in this chaotic meta. The Night Witch not only has superior damage per second and higher hit points, which allows her to tank more hits, but also brings the added value of her bats to deal with air units. While the Hunter is undeniably strong, the Night Witch's versatility and broken stats leave him overshadowed. The Hunter would find his niche, but he just isn't broken enough to truly dominate. And that wraps up 2017. Now let's take a look at the 8 cards that would be dominating the arenas and see which ones have been replaced. Freeze and Mirror would still be strong contenders, remaining effective throughout the entire video. Poison will continue to be a go-to option, especially for taking out that new Night Witch and dealing with other pesky cards. Tornado and Executioner will still wreck against almost everything, including the Night Witch. The Miner is solid, but I'm confident the Mega Knight will be taking his place this year, bringing more raw power and versatility to the table. Of course, the Night Witch will be a new addition to the list this year, while the Princess is likely to stay. Her unique abilities make her irreplaceable in this meta. In January of 2018, we saw the introduction of the Royal Ghost, Magic Archer, and the Barbarian Barrel. Let's start by brushing off the Barbarian Barrel. It was quite underwhelming, costing 3 Elixir with low damage output. The Magic Archer was similarly disappointing on release, so we won't spend much time on him either. However, the Royal Ghost, now that card made some serious waves. Let's see if those waves were as significant in this meta as they were in 2018. The Royal Ghost was a menace upon release. He boasted much higher damage, a good amount of extra hit points, and a faster invisibility time, 0.7 seconds instead of the current 1.8 seconds today. For just 3 Elixir, this Ghost was an absolute powerhouse. In this meta, he'd likely fulfill a similar role to the Night Witch, offering both the defensive potential and the ability to quickly transition into a counter push. He could even be deployed right at the bridge, forcing your opponent to react swiftly. In April of 2018, we got the Rascals. Yep, that's it. Nothing else to say. In June of 2018, we saw the introduction of Royal Recruits, Royal Hogs, and Giant Snowball. The Giant Snowball was released a bit too weak and didn't really make much of an impact, though it could have been a fun contender in a different context. The Royal Hogs, on the other hand, didn't offer anything particularly groundbreaking and would likely be obliterated by heavy hitters like the Mega Knight, Night Witch, and Executioner. But what about those Royal Recruits? If you were an active player back in 2018, you'd remember the Royal Recruits' dominance in the meta. Costing only 6 Elixir, they could easily overwhelm opponents, and players struggled to get a positive Elixir trade while defending against them. Often, players couldn't mount a counter push after defending the Recruits. However, in this meta, I think their impact would be far less potent. While they might still be somewhat decent, Tornado and Executioner would shred them. Mega Knight and even Night Witch could deal with them all with ease, and don't forget about the Cannon with its 7-tile radius and substantial hit points. This highlights how crucial balance is in Clash Royale. Even a card like Royal Recruits, which once dominated the game, would not survive in this meta without any significant adjustments. In September of 2018, we received the Goblin Giant, but honestly it was a bit underwhelming. By this point, the only viable tanks would still be Mega Knight and Lava Hound. The Giant Skelly would be considered one of those tanks due to his bomb, but in this meta, the Mega Knight's spawn damage pretty much replaces that role, making the Giant Skeleton far less effective. In November of 2018, the Electro Dragon entered the arena. While it wasn't a game changer, it certainly could have its uses. Its ability to survive in the air would make it resilient in some decks, especially against ground-based threats. It wouldn't dominate, but it could definitely find a place in certain strategies. By December, we saw the Ram Rider join the arena. She was strong, but with Mega Knight being so prominent, she would face some struggles in the meta. Likewise, the Electro Wizard, though useful, didn't completely shift the meta. While she wouldn't break the game further, the Ram Rider might find some wins here and there with the right support. And that's kinda already it for 2018. I believe the top 8 cards from earlier in the year would still hold their place, though a Royal Ghost might sneak up into the top 8, replacing one of the original picks. As for Poison, while not broken in itself, it plays a vital role in countering certain cards in this chaotic meta, making it incredibly useful despite not being OP. In February of 2019, we would receive the Wall Breakers, absolutely terrible on release, costing 3 Elixir. Next! In April, the Earthquake was released. This could be a great addition if buildings are all meta, but honestly, I kinda doubt that they would be. This is mainly due to the fact that nearly all buildings were either common or rare, resulting in them being 2 levels lower than all the legendaries. If there were any epic buildings or legendary, then maybe Earthquake would see some use, but meh. The Goblin Cage is the next card released in June of 2019. He had a rather underwhelming release, which results in him being left out of the conversation for this video. 2 months later, we got the Fisherman entering the arena with a cost of 4 Elixir, resulting in him being underpowered. Now we finally get to the first relevant card in 2019, and it might shake things up a bit. It was so strong that on the day it got released, it received a 10% health nerf to all Elixir Golem forms, and later again for another 6% to all of its forms. This pink monstrosity is nearly unstoppable for only 3 Elixir. Pair him with a Night Witch and some other OP nonsense, and you'll have yourself a push that even Muhammad Light himself could not defend. In 2019, most cards were released quite underpowered, except for the Elixir Golem, and I feel like the Elixir Golem was released so strong that it might be able to make a spot in our top 8. So you know what? Yeah, I'll be taking the Princess out of our top 8 and putting the Elixir Golem in there instead. Don't get me wrong, she is still strong, but at this point, I'm afraid she'll just be caught in all the chaos without being able to provide a lot of value. The Elixir Golem is often paired with the Battle Healer, and I believe that for this video, it would be no different. She was released quite strong, as she was soon met with a 10% health nerf. She will assist by making that already nightmarish push even scarier by constantly healing everything around her. The next month, the Firecracker enters the arena, the biggest difference being that her recoil knocked her back 2 full tiles. She'll be annoying, sure, but not like the princess, so we can just kind of forget about her. Now, originally in April of 2020, the heal spell would be replaced and make space for the heal spirit, but I kind of consider that a balance change, so it is kind of just reworking a card. So I'm sorry, heal spirit, but you just don't exist in this world. But what does exist in this world, and also came out in April, is the Royal Delivery. Not that it matters though, as it won't be able to keep up in this meta, but hey, at least you were mentioned. Later that year, we also received the Skeleton Dragons, Electro Spirit, Mother Witch, and Electro Giant. But none of those cards really had an impact except for the Electro Giant. This giant will probably have an impact in this chaotic meta. Paired with the Tornado, he can deal some immense damage to enemy troops while storming at the tower. Night Witch won't be a great answer, as her bats will die simply hitting the Electro Giant once. I suppose that we can put in the Electro Giant for perhaps poison. Electro Giant with Tornado has a similar effect to poison. I'm aware it's 10 Elixir, but E-Giant surely is more broken than the poison spell on release. In 2021, only 4 cards were released, with the Goblin Drill being the first. While it might see some play, it's not a game changer. Things get more interesting though with the introduction of a new rarity, champions. These champions follow the same rules as legendaries, being able to reach up to 2 levels above commons and rares, and 1 level above epics. This year, the Archer Queen, Skeleton King, and Golden Knight were released. Each of these could have a chance at claiming a spot in our top 8, but the Archer Queen in particular stands out. With her cloaking ability, the Archer Queen can deal massive damage while remaining undetected. At the time of her release, no one carried lightning, which was her primary weakness. Additionally, there was a bug involving her and the Mega Knight. Specifically, the Mega Knight couldn't deal spawn damage to her while she was invisible. Another bug made her immune to splash damage when cloaked. The Golden Knight and Skeleton King were also strong contenders, but they might face more challenges against certain cards, like the Night Witch. On top of that, champions have the added benefit of a 3-card cycle, which could be advantageous for various strategies. At this point, it's getting increasingly difficult to determine which cards truly deserve a spot in our top 8. While the Archer Queen may be a strong contender to replace the Elixir Golem, it's becoming more and more challenging to decide which cards should stay and which should go. In 2022, we saw the release of the Mighty Miner, Monk, and Phoenix, all of which were incredibly strong. The Mighty Miner, while powerful, had some drawbacks, such as taking knockback from Fireball and Mega Knight. His ability also used to cost 2 Elixir compared to the current 1 Elixir. On the other hand, the Monk and the Phoenix were on an entirely different level. The Monk, costing only 4 Elixir, was especially valuable with his ability, which provided excellent counterplay against the Archer Queen and other ranged troops. The Phoenix, however, may just be the strongest card in Clash Royale history, even surpassing the Night Witch. With high DPS, solid health, and the fact that it's hard to target because it flies, the Phoenix was a dominant force. The biggest game changer, though, was its ability to spawn as an egg after being defeated, which would hatch into another Phoenix if left alone. The Phoenix would definitely claim a spot in our top 8, but let's hold off on a final decision and leave the complete top 8 as a surprise for the end of the video. 2023 added the Little Prince, which yes was very strong, but I doubt it would make a big dent in whatever mess we've created in this video. 2023 also added card evolutions, but technically those aren't new cards and add something to already existing cards, which is why I'll be counting it as a balance change. 2024, Clash Royale introduced Tower Troops. The Cannoneer was arguably better than the Princess Tower, but this became irrelevant a few months later with the release of the Dagger Duchess. This new Tower Troop quickly outshined all the others, establishing itself as the go-to option, much like we saw in the meta this year. We also saw the Void, which had situational uses but didn't stand out compared to the powerhouse of the meta. Later in 2024, the Goblin Curse and Goblin Machine arrived, shaking up the top 8 once again. The Goblin Curse is a game changer, allowing you to deal 50% more damage to broken cards and turning them into goblins, which offers a significant advantage. The Goblin Machine was also completely overpowered, firing a rocket every 3.5 seconds, dealing full damage to crown towers. Pre-nerf Goblin Machine could definitely have some dominance in this meta. The Goblin Demolisher was released alongside the aforementioned cards, but it won't have much impact in this context. The Suspicious Bush would easily be crushed by nearly everything. And lastly, we have the Goblinstein. While not weak, the Goblinstein faces stiff competition due to the limitation of only being able to run 1 champion in a deck. Most players would likely opt for the Archer Queen or Monk instead, and this lineup of cards dramatically shifted the meta, with the Goblin Machine and Dagger Duchess being major contenders in the top 8. Now to finally answer the title of this video, after 43 minutes and 37 seconds, what if Clash Royale never received any balance changes? Well, the game would be dead. Years ago. The game would just be dead. But for the sake of this video, let's see what it would look like by looking at our top 8. Two cards really stand out as they make overpowered cards even more overpowered. These two cards are the Freeze Spell and Mirror. The other 6 I would put in this list would be the following: Phoenix, Night Witch, Mega Knight, Tornado, Executioner, and Monk. And as for the Tower Troop, we're going to be opting for the Dagger Duchess, obviously. Let me know in the comments down below what your top 8 is and what you think of my top 8. Clash Royale with no balance changes would be absolutely crazy. Wanna know what else is crazy? The history of the Bomber. It went from being a 3 Elixir card with massive hit points and damage to a 2 Elixir card that shook things up with its broken evolution. Definitely check out that video next. I'll see you there.